This December 2021, the Nicaraguan government announced that it formally broke ties with Taiwan. And if you want to know the history of all of that, I did a separate video discussing that with my colleague Max Blumenthal. And Nicaragua allied officially with the People's Republic of China. Nicaragua announced that Nicaragua wants to be part of the Belt and Road Initiative, China's massive global infrastructure project. And China is very likely going to build an interoceanic canal going through Nicaragua, challenging the monopoly of the US-dominated Panama Canal. This was a very important development. And it's also a sign of China working together in Latin America to develop infrastructure. El Salvador, a neighbor of Nicaragua, also has an alliance with China, and China is helping to build a national library, is investing in buildings in the capital, and is expanding the port and infrastructure projects in other parts of Latin America. So when China comes to Latin America, it offers high quality, high tech infrastructure that it builds in a very short period of time, very rapidly, and it's very high quality. Meanwhile, what is the US proposing to Latin America? Here we have the White House, the Biden White House just announced, specifically Kamala Harris, vice president. She came out of her hibernation after being in hiding for weeks and announced new commitments as part of the call for action for the private sector to deepen investment in Central America, now totaling over $1.2 billion. For me, this says everything about the neoliberal US government. China comes to Latin America saying, we are not going to impose any conditions on you. You don't have to privatize anything. You don't have to cut healthcare and education. You don't have to drop the minimum wage. Those are all things the US government forces through structural adjustment, through the IMF and the World Bank, forcing governments like Haiti to cut the minimum wage to a few cents an hour, forcing governments to privatize their natural resources so they can sell it off to North American corporations. Well, that is the US policy, but that is not China's policy. China does not impose conditions, which is why more and more countries in Latin America, including Nicaragua, are turning to China to build infrastructure. So to try to compete with China, the United States says, okay, we're going to pressure our corporations, the private sector, to invest $1.2 billion in Central America. Now, keep in mind, China just announced $500 million of free investment that the Chinese state is investing in El Salvador. This is not through corporations, and this is non-reimbursable. This is not something that the Salvadorian government is paying for. This is something that China is giving voluntarily to El Salvador. But of course, the US could never do that because that would be socialism. Instead, everything the US does internationally and domestically has to be a so-called public-private partnership. Corporations have to profit off of it. This is the US, the Biden administration's policy, and of course, Trump administration's former policy for Central America to try to pressure corporations, US corporations, to invest. But of course, they're not doing that out of the kindness of their hearts. So here, let's look at the summary of this. Cargill, the horrible food corporation, Grupo Mariposa, Parkdale Mills, a textile company, Pepsi, the great human rights warriors at Pepsi, JDE Peet's, which is going to invest in coffee production, and PriceSmart, which is like similar to Walmart, announced commitments to supposedly support economic development in the Northern Triangle in Central America. Yeah, economic development, by which meaning they're going to exploit Central American workers. Since when does Pepsi and Cargill care about economic development anywhere, yet alone in Central America? This is part of a conference convened by the State Department and the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, which is a corporate lobby group, and the Partnership for Central America, created by, of course, Biden. So this is their policy of so-called investment in Central America. It is helping U.S. corporations exploit Central American workers. This is how the U.S. thinks it's going to compete with China. And here you can see that Vice President Kamala Harris announced the new commitments as part of a call to action she launched originally back in May 27th. And in addition to Cargill and Parkdale Mills and Pepsi, who are going to exploit Central American labor, they also have MasterCard, Microsoft, and Nespresso announced further action. So $1.2 billion. So yeah, they're going to, when the U.S. says that Pepsi and PriceSmart and Cargill are announcing so-called economic investment to develop Central America, what they mean is that they're going to open sweatshops. They're going to open big corporate sweatshops, these big factories to exploit Central American workers for very low wages. That is what they mean by economic development. And of course, this is done with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, drawing over 1,300 business, government, and civil society leaders with an emphasis on business. So all of this is about corporate exploitation. It's not about development. So it's no surprise that countries in Latin America are instead turning toward China, because China is actually helping to develop the region with infrastructure projects. This is an article I published back in March at the Gray Zone. Right-wing Central American leaders praise neoliberal Biden plan to strengthen U.S., quote, sphere of influence. I talk about this meeting that was held bringing together major right-wing former leaders in Central America who were praising this plan that Kamala Harris announced the expansion of, the so-called Biden plan, which really means billions of dollars of corporate so-called investment in Central America, which means that U.S. corporations are going to open up shops in Central America at the pressure of the U.S. government, and they're going to exploit labor in Central America for pennies on the dollar. And I point out that in this meeting, these right-wing former leaders of El Salvador and Guatemala and Panama and Costa Rica praised the U.S. government, and they said openly that the U.S. should treat Central America as its, quote, sphere of influence to prevent China and Russia from having positive relations with the countries in the region and from helping to develop the region. So this is the difference between Chinese investment in Latin America and the U.S. China comes and says, all right, we're going to give you these loans to build infrastructure. Yeah, you have to pay back the loans. No one's going to give you something for free, but they're low interest loans, and we're going to help pardon your debt. We're going to help renegotiate your debt so it's not burdensome on your economy. This is what China has done with millions of dollars of loans that it made to Cuba, forgiving and pardoning and helping to renegotiate loans with Cuba. And it's also what China has done with other countries in Latin America, in Venezuela, and parts of Africa and other parts of the global south. China does not impose any political conditions or any economic conditions. The countries don't have to impose neoliberal austerity. Meanwhile, the U.S. idea of so-called investment and development is the U.S. government pressures corporations to come down and they exploit your labor. The IMF and the World Bank force you to impose neoliberal structural adjustment programs in the Washington Consensus to cut wages, to privatize healthcare, to privatize education, to privatize natural resources. That is the difference between the U.S. neoliberal economic model and the Chinese model of mutually beneficial South-South development through the Belt and Road Initiative, through the New Silk Road, through South-South solidarity. So it's no surprise that countries in Latin America are increasingly looking not toward the U.S., but rather toward China to actually develop their countries. Because look, for 200 years, since the Monroe Doctrine of the 1820s, the U.S. has been constantly meddling, intervening in and invading and occupying Central America and Latin America as a whole. And look what that's brought it. Poverty, crime, violence, corruption, mass migration. So it's no surprise that after 200 years of exploitation and pillage in these policies, that Latin America is looking toward other possibilities. And of course, for them, the future looks bright. But for the US, which is terrified of these possibilities, that they'll turn toward China and Russia, the US is desperately trying to claw back control and reimpose its corporate domination on Latin America.